Happy Friday, Hoosier fans, and welcome back to another episode of the House of Hoosier here on the Field of 68 Podcast Network. Alongside Ian Plaskoff, I am Austin Platt, and our first guest of this year is an old friend of ours. Yes, the co-host from last year, Ben Haller. Ben, welcome back. We missed you a lot. Glad to have you back inside the House of Hoosier.
It feels just like last year. Not much changed, but no, thanks for having me on. Obviously, Ian is the most fit to take my position, and very excited for Indiana fans to get to know Ian.
I guess while the people might not know what you're doing now, explain why I basically booted you out and brought Ian in.
Yeah, so as many of you may know or may not know, doing this podcast for Field of 68, what they're trying to do is expand more and just grow to more team-centered content and get more people involved. So and they're always looking to add more teams. So I took on the project this year of adding another team. I currently host the Xavier podcast. I grew up in Cincinnati, so a lot of connections to Xavier University, home for a few games every year, and I now run the Xavier Musketeers podcast for the Field of 68. It's a good time.
What's the name of it? Just so that the people know if they want to follow.
Musketeer Madness.
There you go. The House of Hoosier is still a better name, but
House
well,
Hoosiers is a good name.
it is. But remember we joked last year that maybe Xavier and Indiana would face off in the NIT if Indiana accepted the bid, but that was not the case.
Yeah, Xavier only. I think they lost in the first round of the NIT, so I don't know if it would have happened anyway.
Regardless, it's 2024-25, and let's just say we're glad last year's over with, and obviously we're here to dissect Indiana's second win of the year against Eastern Illinois and preview one of the bigger non-conference games that Indiana has in South Carolina. So I guess to start, kind of going back to Sunday, boy, these games are spaced out quite a bit to start the year, which is something I've never liked, and we saw that a lot last year. But Indiana wins 90-55 over Eastern Illinois. I'll start with you. Your overall thoughts. Obviously, the first half was ugly. Indiana was down by one at the break. Another poor start, but the second half was maybe the best half of basketball we've seen in the Mike Woodson era. I get it. It's Eastern Illinois. It's not a very good team in the OVC, but that was still a fun 20 minutes to watch after the break.
Yeah, I mean, you covered it, Austin. It was a tale of two halves in this one, much like game one. A lot of the same mistakes, a lot of the same problems that got solved in the second half of both games. But this second half in particular was it may be one of the best halves of basketball I've seen Indiana in my lifetime. Um, the second half, we'll start there. We'll go back to the first half and see what got fixed or what the problems were. But first, let's see what they did in the second. 54-18, the second half score in favor of the Hoosiers. Indiana shot 22 of 34 from the field and held Eastern Illinois to 5 of 30. I mean, that's pretty much all you need to know there on a large scale. We'll dive into the players and everything in just a minute, but it was just pure dominance. Everything was clicking in that second half. Only 4 turnovers for Indiana, which is a problem they solved from the first half. And just everybody contributing from the starters to the bench, front court, back court. Players you didn't really expect to show up, showed up, and it was just a beautiful half of basketball.
Yeah, I'm sure you guys have touched on it, but just big picture wise, I think it was John Rothstein who had a tweet today who said bye games are good for determining, maybe what the rotation's going to be, what combinations work together on the floor. They're usually not a good indicator of how good your team is. I mean, too often we see teams play really close to some of those mid-major teams and then end up doing really well throughout the season, and then vice versa. I've seen Indiana fans unhappy, which I think is funny because even even with that thought in mind, if you just throw that out the window, if you look around college basketball world right now, these bye games are getting closer and closer year by year, especially now with these power conference teams who are full of transfers. I mean, Indiana's another one of them, having what is it, three incoming transfers in that starting lineup. This is the first time these guys are playing a real game together. First time they're playing in an assembly hall crowd together. I mean, they've played in 2 regular season games now. And also, some of these mid-major teams are getting better because of these fifth, sixth year seniors that have just been there for a while. Um, so my overall impression, I would say right now, has been really positive. I think specifically with the Eastern Illinois game, I think what that Indiana team showed is just that they have that ability to get going. I'm sure that the halftime locker room speech from Mike Woodson was very aggressive, but there's just so many options, and we saw that in the second half against Eastern Illinois. So many guys who can shoot a little bit, which is so different from last year, but also so many guys who can get down low, and that really makes it tough for matchup wise.
I think it's easy to tell if your team is not very good at non-conference play, which is what we saw last year when Indiana skated by Florida Gulf Coast, Army, Wright State wasn't a big one. Those first three games where Indiana just did not look good, and it was a red flag, and not enough people, I think, took it as that way. But obviously, a little bit different this year. The front court is the main conversation. Obviously, Mackenzie Mbako building off of a 31 point performance. He had 18 points, which was a game high, and then Balo and Renew each had 17. Those guys were all well over 50% from the field. Even Ibaka knocked down a pair of threes, and Balo 80%, 9 rebounds as well. Looked more physical, which I think the word that we were looking for, which Indiana did not have in the first half. But I mean, if those three guys are going to be able to combine for, I mean, if each of them score 15, if they can combine for 50 points in every game, you're going to feel pretty good about yourself.
Yeah, Austin, we talked about this after game one, and I highlighted how this is a team like as it's still developing that it could be anybody's day on any given day. Game one it was Mbako, then game two it was more of a spread performance across all three front court players, like you said, and then Trey Galloway came in late with his playmaking. But this team is just so deep, like we've talked about throughout this whole young season, that they don't need to rely on one player and or one group of players. Like if you look at Indiana's backcourt in this game, Miles Rice only took 3 shots. Kanan Carlisle took 7. Those are the starters. Um, and then Luke Goody, I mean, technically he could be a front court player as a small 3. Ja'Kai Newton took 3 shots, Gabe Cupps 1, and Trey Galloway 3. And then you look at the front court, you see Renew taking 12 shots, and Baco and Ballo each taking 10, Bryson Tucker taking 7. I mean, the game plan is clear that, you know, against certain teams, especially in these bye games, you can game plan to feature more of your size, which other teams don't have. And that's what Indiana did here against Eastern Illinois. And sometimes during the Big Ten play, it's going to have to be up to the guards. But this team has that luxury of being able to flip back and forth. Today was a big day, and who knows, maybe South Carolina is going to be a guard day.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think that, oh, I'll just say this. I'm interested to see how that works against the Big Ten teams, like you mentioned. Any power conference team's going to do that against some of the mid-major teams just because the biggest difference a lot of times is size. But I think anyway, this Indiana team is led up front. I think what a lot of questions that Indiana fans have had coming into the year is how well Ballo and Renew play together. I don't know about you guys. I haven't seen a spacing issue yet. I think they've both played really well together. I think Renew's ability to, you don't trust him necessarily from three, but his ability to be out there and maybe clear some space for Umar Ballo, I think is going to be big going throughout the year. So obviously, it's only 2 games in, but that is my biggest question that I'm going to keep looking at is how the spacing works with Renew and Ballo.
And Ben, I think building off of that, I mean, Malik Renew looks like he's in the best shape of his life right now. And
Yeah.
he's been able to be mobile and be active and move around more. And I think that's allowed that two big set to work is Renew's ability to move. And also, Ballo has improved with his passing as well. So when the ball gets dropped into him down low, he's not just stuck there like we would have seen um, at Arizona or at Gonzaga. The movement of Renew and his agility and his stamina and the passing of ball has really allowed that to work. And those sets that they're running play off of that as well.
The biggest worry I have with Ballo, who's obviously not going to play, on Sunday he played 27 minutes, and then Renew got 25, obviously. And they were out with plenty of time left considering the game was over. But Ballo's not going to be a guy that's going to eat up, 32 minutes every night. He just doesn't have the stamina. So I worry a little bit about just the pick and roll with him a little bit. With Galloway, it's looked good, but some other instances where he just doesn't have enough time to get down after setting a screen, and that pick and roll really works. So that's the only thing I worry about. There are times where you just gotta sometimes leave them down low, and Ben, like you said, just leave Renew out there. There's nothing
Yep.
wrong with it. If you have to clear ball out, and then Renew can ISO or try and drive on his own, you're not worried about that, considering as you mentioned, Aiden, he's in great shape and he looks comfortable on all sides of the ball. So that's my only concern is just the stamina for Balo, and obviously this all has to work, but Renew's got to stay on the floor, and that's been an issue we've seen over his first 2 years with foul trouble. Only one foul on Sunday for him in 25 minutes. Let's talk about Bryson Tucker. I mean, man, was he good or what off the bench that second half? I mean, it felt like a combine for him. They were just trying to see how high he could jump with all the alley-oops they were giving him. That's how much fun he was to watch. But 12 points, 5 of 7 shooting, made both of his free throws, 6 rebounds in 20 minutes. He can really do it all. And I mean, it's just like, man, if we could have someone like Bryson Tucker last year, I mean, God, Indiana was just yearning for someone like him. But I mean, he is so fun to watch. And, everyone has said it. He doesn't play like a freshman. And that's probably good for him because he's the only true freshman on the team.
Yep.
Yeah, Austin, I think what Tucker does is he allows you to be more flexible in the front court. Um, in the season preview, we really didn't know what he was going to be like. And we kept talking about, we kept going back and forth. What's going to happen? Renew at the five, Mbako at the four. Do they put Mbako at the four, Ball at the five at some point? But now I think Bryson Tucker has a strong case when Renew is at the five to play either a big three or the four. Haven't really seen him play with Mbako too much, so we don't know how that's going to work. But individually speaking, Bryson Tucker has earned more minutes than before, and I think a longer leash for Mike Woodson as well, because those freshman mistakes are going to come eventually. But so far, I mean, he was expected to be good, but I don't think he was expected to be this good this early. And that's been a pleasant sight.
Yeah, well, here's the interesting thing about the whole Balo Renew situation right now and having them both in at the same time. When it comes down to it and the rotation gets cut, if I'm an Indiana fan, and from what I've seen through 2 games that of guys that have actually played, Langdon Hatton might be the first guy I want to see cut. That makes it really tough because it kind of leaves you almost bigless on the bench. So you can't have Balo and Renew in together all the at the same time all the time because obviously both of them need their rest and you're not playing without one of those two on the floor. So Tucker's ability to play the four is going to come up big. I do trust his ability to guard maybe a stretch four. I mean, Indiana fans love to point this out. It's a college basketball world where not a lot of teams carry like a 6'10" four anymore at the floor if there's someone else 6'10", 7 foot on the court. So I think that part's interesting. The other thing to me about Bryson Tucker, and this is really rare for a freshman, but my feeling so far is there's so much depth on this team. The reason that's nice is because of exactly what you said, Ian. Sometimes this team's going to have not everyone's going to have their best day. So I think having Tucker is almost a steady hand. That's the kind of player I see he is. He's not somebody who's going hot and cold from the floor. He's somebody that can be in the right spots and finish through contact down low. So guys like that are usually not the, streaky up and down kind of guys. So having a steady hand like him could be big.
Yeah, I mean, it's his role is going to be so interesting, and yeah, you bring a good point about Hatton. I mean, when this bench does get cut, and obviously you have to remember that Anthony Leal is probably going to be a part of this in some way when he's back from injury. It doesn't seem like it's a long-term issue, but IU doesn't really tell us anything, so we really never know when he's going to return. But it's from what we've heard, it's nothing too serious. The other thing while we're on the topic of rotations, when Trey Galloway gets off that minutes restriction, is he going to start over Carlisle? We've seen Carlisle who made made a pair of threes in that second half, which really got him going, considering he was 0 for 5, which was to start the game, which I think the same was what he was in that season opener. Are you okay playing, potentially like a three guard set with let's say Rice, Carlisle, and Galloway with one of Renew or Ballo, and then someone like Ibaka or Tucker on the floor. I mean, this is something we could see. I mean, let's say Ibaka is that other guy, and then you have Ballo or Renew at the five. Are you okay having Carlisle, Rice, Galloway, and Ibaka all on the floor at the same time? If Indiana wants to really space things out and knowing what Carlisle and Galloway can both do defensively and Rice's pace, and it's tough for guys to get by him. That's something interesting, but we're going to kind of have to see how it goes because we know Woodson obviously loves his big man and loves his defense.
I think personally, I'm a big fan of Galloway coming off the bench, but with a good number of minutes off the bench. I think Carlisle's the better defender, and I think that's more important for the starting lineup that's out there that we've seen for the past two games because Miles Rice isn't the greatest guard defensively. So Carlisle's going to pick up that slack a little bit. And same with M'Baku, although he's improved that defensively. There isn't a lot of defensive power in that starting lineup, and I think that's where Carlisle comes into play. And also, people forget he is a talented scorer. He's just started off the year relatively cold. He had a 40-point game last year at Stanford.
And
Um,
battling injury.
what was that, Ben?
And battling injury too. I'll just
Yeah,
throw that in there. It's tough.
yeah. Um, and then we've seen Galloway come off the bench, and he's been that that glue guy that's made the bench offense work at a steady pace. And whether that's been with a mix of starters and some bench players in there as well, or just straight bench players, I mean, we saw last year so many times that the bench just falters out and there was no production on the floor. So having Galloway there to run the offense and prevent that drop off, I think that's more valuable than him being in the starting lineup.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think fans just love to look at the point totals and love to look at the box scores and make their assumptions and make their choices have how they feel on Kane and Carlisle pretty early through the first two games. I think I like Carlisle on the starting lineup too. Galloway is just such a spark plug off the bench. I think we saw it a couple of years ago at Indiana. Just sometimes you need that extra push from the bench. Your starting lineup's been out there for a while, and you need kind of that extra oomph. And I think Trey Galloway brings that. I agree defensively too. The problem is they're going to need a lot of guys to be versatile. I mean, it goes back to the whole Ballo and Reduce situation, just with only one of them on the floor at many times. It's going to be how many guys could play up. Kane and Carlisle moving up to a three, maybe having to guard a bigger three. When it gets down to it, you run four guards. I don't know if Galloway's ever or Carlisle's ever going to be that four, but even if he's not on a man to man, you got to know that when the push comes to shove and he gets switched onto a bigger guy, you got to think he'll do a better job with that than Galloway. I think is what we've seen so far.
Well, that's kind of all the lineup stuff, and it'll be interesting to see how things carry on, and especially with the way the schedule is. You get one game against South Carolina, then you go to the Bahamas for 3 games in 3 days, and then December hits. There's a few Big Ten games sprinkled in there. I forgot there's the UNC Greensboro game that's
Yeah,
the next Thursday. So the schedule's a little odd in terms of it. I've always hated this. You're not
it's a
playing.
weird schedule.
It's silly. It's the way it was last year too. Like the first 3 games, it's like Thursday, then the next week, and then you get 5 days off. It's like, and then oh boom, you're playing 3 games in 3 days over Thanksgiving break.
You can't get a rhythm too. I mean, it's just so weird as like a college as student athlete to go through it. But that's my 2 cents.
Problems we will never have as a
Yeah.
journalist is having to worry about, oh, when are we going to play our next game? The first half was really poor. I guess let's just touch on that quickly. For me, it was just the energy, or like it was a noon game, and Indiana was scoring, but just they were not physical up top with ball screens on either end of the floor. Rebounding was a little bit of a struggle with the offensive rebound, which is something we saw in the SIUE game. Just really poor. And I mean, you look at it, that was a terrible 20 minutes, and Indiana was only down by one, fine. But I mean, they gave up like 37 points, I think it was, in that first half. Yeah, they gave up 37. And the three guards, I mean, Brewster, Shelton, and Stapleton, all for Eastern Illinois, were very good. And overall, just, I mean, you look at it, they were bad in, like, say, the first 15 minutes of that game against SIUE before they really pulled away. And then these 20 minutes, I mean, that's 35 out of 80 minutes where the team does not look good. That's a concern.
I mean, it goes back to Ben's comment earlier about the bye games. And that it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be a 50-point blowout every time. It's not going to be a start to finish 40-minute um just thrashing. I mean, these are these are for teams to figure out what works and what doesn't. And obviously this wasn't really a tactical problem. It was more of an effort problem in that first half where it looked like they kind of just looked over Eastern Illinois for that first 20 minutes and then their eyes opened up in the locker room at halftime. Um, the only thing that really kept Indiana close in that first half, because they turned the ball over 8 times in the half, was that Eastern Illinois also turned it over 8 times and didn't rebound the ball well. So if Eastern Illinois didn't turn the ball over, it'd be a lot different, I think, in that second half as well. And it would look a lot worse in the first half. But it was just, it all stems from effort and energy. And it just wasn't there in the first half. But like I said earlier, it was a tale of two halves, completely different in the second. Nothing too much to overreact to in game two of the season. I mean, we know how Indiana fans are, but you gotta look closer and see what really happened, the reasons for things happening, and the reason was just effort, which is a fixable problem.
Yeah, Ian, you're right. And I think one of the biggest things too is I don't have the numbers on this, but it feels like we've had a record number of by game losses by power conference teams in the first what 10, 11 days of the season. I mean, that's just what it feels like. There's been a lot of them. Uh Minnesota actually, right as we're recording this, just lost to North Texas, I think it was. So it's happening a lot. Um I'll put it like this too, since Indiana's such a football school now. Hey, Austin, Indiana football hasn't lost a game since the last time we did a podcast. So
Well done.
it's pretty impressive. But it's not the same as football where like, okay, Indiana and school Y have the same resume, but school Y looked better, beat teams by more against these mid-major teams. That's not really how the basketball resume works, just because there's such a large sample size and you play 30 games. There's also more parity in college basketball. So it's something to be concerned for. It's happening all around college basketball. The first half, I'll say this, with this happening all around college basketball, there is one giant, obvious, very present recipe for a mid-major team to come into a game like that and beat a power conference team, and it's just shoot the lights out. And it's not even saying that a lot of these mid-major teams are good shooting teams, but these are college athletes. What happens is when they get hot early, they're in that kind of situation. They got a really good chance to stay hot. So the number one thing playing these buy games you have to do is you have to defend the 3-point line early, and Indiana did not do that well.
Yeah, 5 for 10. The Panthers were the Shelton was just couldn't miss in that first half. It felt like he was 6 for 9
Yeah.
from the field, 15 points in 19 minutes. And then in the second half, they really came down to earth, just 2 of 10 from beyond the arc. And Indiana's big size advantage, we just didn't see that as much in the first half. And it was the second half where they really pulled away. Although Apollo had 11 first half points and Renew had 8, but I mean there was just a huge size differential over guys and the big guys that Eastern Illinois have really didn't weren't offensively all that dangerous. So it was kind of tick for tack, giving up one for the other. But it was a bad 20 minutes, but Indiana got past it. And in the end, a big 35-point win. I've said this before. I want to see Indiana in all the non-conference home games. 15, I want the average to be the margin of victory. So we can do the math every episode if we want to, but they won by, what was it, 19 against SIUE and now 35. So 35 and 19 is math is 54
56,
to
right?
27. So average of 27, something like that. So so far so good. Let's see it around 15 to 20 because obviously we know the computer rankings what how they like and don't like IU. We had this conversation, Ben, all of last year. It was so much
Dude,
fun.
every week after every game, it was like, all right, they won, but at some point they have to get some blowout, and it's not just the wins, it was the losses too. That's the one thing. I do say that not necessarily the eye test doesn't really matter to the March Madness world. The net apparently likes margin of victory a lot, and that's what we saw, I think, a lot last year in the committee's decision. Virginia got in the tournament because they never got blown out because they never let anyone score more than 40 points, even if they were only scoring 32 points, and they would lose by 8, even though they never had a chance to win in that game. But uh, No, winning by 19 the first game of the year is not concerning when it comes to the metrics.
All right. Next talking point. Basically, let's answer. Let's try and figure out a few things about offensively from the game. I guess to start with Luke Goody. Hit his first shot, first baskets from beyond the arc, I believe, in regular season play. 6 points, 2 of 5 shooting in 12 minutes. Had 2 fouls and 2 rebounds as well. Consistency is going to be the main thing for him, and can he get enough shots coming off the bench, knowing defensively where he is right now is not good enough for Mike Woodson's style? Is there going to be enough shots for him to really contribute? Because 12 minutes in this game, when Galloway's obviously going to be ahead of him on the depth chart, and Tucker, even though he's listed as a forward, kind of and can almost play any of those positions, and Goody just almost could play himself out of a role. It almost feels like, but he's got to get enough shots, and he has to just be consistent enough. It's right at 40% last year with Illinois. He's got to be right there. How much do we worry about Luke Goody to this point?
Austin, all year long, you've been talking about the three ball, the volume, and the production, and Luke Goody is the big question mark there, because we don't know where he's going to fit in the rotation when it gets cut down as the Big Ten season approaches. Because Anthony Leal has been in this program for 4 years and into his fifth. Luke Goody's a transfer in his first year. We know how Mike Woodson values his seniors, especially seniors that have been in his program. But also, Goody and Leal are very close to the same player, except Leal is a little bit better defensively. A lot of the same role. Um, we don't know how the rotation is going to get cut, but I do like that Goody kept shooting. I mean, he made two, he shot five, which is more than most did on this team in that game. Um, and you're not going to know if you don't shoot, so you might as well shoot. I like what Luke Goody did. I think he could be a big piece from behind the arc this year, but it's just a matter of where he fits in the rotation.
My worry for Luke Goody is that he's going to get in this weird role where, like, all right, they're going to try him every game. They're going to put him in the first half because his 3-point shooting is just too valuable. But if he misses his first two threes and he's not hot that day, then maybe he doesn't get many minutes. And that's just so tough for a shooter because you're going to have cold days and shooters got to keep shooting and Goody's got to keep shooting. That's why these college shooters are just so different. Um, I don't. He's not terrible defensively. I think at Illinois, they obviously Illinois is a team I think that cared a little bit more on the offensive side than the defensive side when you compare them to Indiana, which is I think why will probably see more minutes on from Illinois last year than Indiana this year. But I do think he's going to be a valuable piece off the bench. I like Galloway Tucker in that 6'7" role. I mean that is a tough sixth and seventh man, but I think Goody could be right there at 8.
Should be good enough for him to get enough minutes. All right, so with Goody out of the way, Miles Rice again, I mean, quiet. I mean, 5 points, 3 fouls, did have 5 assists, 2 turnovers, just 3 shots in 21 minutes. Got to the free throw line after a possession. Kind of is the offense kind of really gonna run through him? We mentioned the identity of this offense. We don't know what it is quite yet, considering. But we don't know if Galloway's going to start. I think that's just kind of the biggest thing. If he gets off the minutes restriction, does he start and does the offense change at all? So once that's figured out, we'll kind of know what Miles Rice's role is. But I mean, he doesn't have to do a lot. I don't think in this offense. I mean, it's not like Gabe Cupps last year where you literally just pass the ball and get the ball out of your hands as soon as possible because we knew Gabe Cupps wasn't taking many shots last year when he was, playing 25, 30 minutes a game with Xavier Johnson out. But Rice feels like he has to just do a little bit more in transition, and it's going to be times where he gets a long rebound and then it gets the offense going. But I mean, Rice feels like as a scorer right now, which isn't a ton for him because the shots I think that Kaden Carlisle is going to get are ones that are going to take away from Miles Rice.
I think this also goes with what I was talking about earlier with the bigs and just the game plan for this game. And we don't know. I mean, Indiana has the potential to be a fast-paced offense, but also they have the talent to be the classic college slow, half-court offense. And we saw more of that in this game. Rice is a player that wants to play fast. We saw that in game one. We saw it in the exhibitions. He will go coast to coast in 3 seconds and try and lay it up himself or try and distribute the ball. this was not a fast game. At least when he was in. He only took 3 shots. Um, and he really didn't have the ball in his hands too much because it was down low with Renew and Balo and also in the hands of Mbako for most of it with that starting group. So I just feel personally like this was a game that wasn't meant for him. There are going to be games that are meant for him and better fit for his play style. So I'm not worried at all. It's just a matter of what works in different situations.
Yeah, the first thing, honestly, that Woodson talked about in the offseason when trying to make adjustments from last year to this year was he wanted to play faster. He wanted his pace to be a lot quicker. That's one of the biggest reasons they brought in Rice. Rice is so good at doing that. He did it at Washington State. Washington State played at one of the fastest paces in the country a season ago. Ken Carlisle's kind of in that boat too. Um, when you're in a new system and you're trying to play faster, and you have a lot of guys who haven't played that fast, Malik Reneau's never been a part of that fast-paced offense in his college career. Trey Galloway really hasn't either. There's going to be turnovers. It's going to take some time to kind of get used to it, which is why I was really happy to see only 2 turnovers from Rice on Sunday. The Ian, what Ian said was right though. They didn't really play that fast on Sunday. I'm interested as to why, um, and if that's something that we're going to see moving forward. If Woodson might kind of leave that plan in the dust, just because it's hard to play that fast and then arguably your two best offensive players are bigs. That's where Miles Rice comes in. He has to be able to score in transition and take care of the ball in transition. And it hasn't been great to start the year, at least in the turnover department, until Sunday.
The final guy I want to touch on, we talked a lot about the front court, so I guess I mentioned Carlisle, but made 2 big shots. Woodson said obviously big to see him see a few hit the net and go down, but I mean, 2 of 7 from the field. He made a pair of threes at the end, but by that point the game was over. Kind of we liked he likes curling off of screens and kind of almost the pick and pop where you let him take that mid-range shot, which it feels like every year that Indiana takes the most of those. But it's almost like the Hood Schifino shot where he just pulls up and tries to hit one from 20 feet. It just hasn't worked so far, and for me, it's just a concern because in this day and age, you just really can't have a guy out there who isn't going to be a threat offensively in some way. And obviously, that can change. His confidence certainly it doesn't feel like it's declining at all because he's still taking these shots. But I mean, if both Rice and Carlisle are not going to be, big scorers, and I really worry this could be kind of similar to last year, where you're just relying too much on the backcourt, or rather on the front court to do everything.
I mean, he did shoot 2 of 7 from the field. I do like the 2 of 4 from three. That does look promising. Um, but I really do like from that two for 7 from the field. I like the 7 more than the two. I like that he was taking shots. They were open. He just didn't hit them all. Um, and I mean, the system isn't really designed for him to be a number one scoring option. So having him take 7 shots while they were all mostly open, I think that's a good sign for what this offense could be because that would make 5 capable scorers out there at the same time in the starting lineup. It's game 2. He's in a new system, transferred in with a bunch of guys who've, also transferred in and have been in the system before, a mix of those. So he doesn't really know what his established role is yet. And I think that 7 field goal attempt number is a good sign for him trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I think Miles Rice can score the ball, but he can also is obviously a really good passer. The having Mackenzie and Bakos being able to score if he can stay at this level, I think is huge. It lets Carlisle not need to score that much. And what Ian said once again, I think Ian said it best. I think the system doesn't need Carlisle to score a ton, especially somebody's got to be the fifth scoring option in the starting lineup. I mean, the other 4 guys really can score it, so I'm not concerned about that at all. Obviously, the confidence I think will come with it too, but Indiana brought back a good amount of talent. When you look at Renew and you look at Mbako and you look at Trey Galloway, I think if you miss on one transfer that's not Miles Rice or Umar Ballo, I don't think it's the end of the world.
Yeah, that's fair. And maybe he'll feel a little more pressure if Galloway, is completely healthy and is off the so-called minutes restriction, even though 18 minutes for Galloway. I mean, still 8 assists for him. Indiana's dishing the ball very well. I mean, 26 assists on 38 field goals. And in that second half, when they completely dominated, it was 12 assists on 22 made field goals. So actually, they distributed the ball a little bit better in the first half when it was 14 assists to 16 made field goals. So they're definitely passing the ball well as a team. I think that's the most important thing because, as we've said before, Ian and I have said, Ben, that Indiana doesn't need one person, I think, this year to play hero ball. It's almost like at times where you almost rely too much on Khalil Ware, or obviously in previous years, Trace Jackson Davis to try and do it all. There isn't that this year. And I think, especially with Rice and Ballo and Renew, all four of those guys, their abilities are all very, very similar to one another, and they all have pretty high ceilings, especially in those four out of the five main scorers. So that's not really a concern too much, but obviously be curious to see what the two main guards in this starting lineup, kind of point wise, kind of combined for with Rice and Carlisle to this point, and obviously Galloway had 5 points as well. But overall, pretty pleased after the first two games. I did just look at the net just for my own entertainment. 98th right now, so and take that for what it's worth. Yeah, 98. Yeah.
Are you sure that's updated? That sounds a lot like what they were last year. I thought Net's one of the ones that doesn't come out until a certain point of the season. I've been fooled by that as well because of the net. When the season changes, they'll change all the stats and the record and everything on the right side to the current season, but keep the net ranking the same. So I would just look at the top and make sure it isn't carbon copy from last year.
Yeah, you're right. Well, it says net rankings through March 17th, 2024. Oh, NCAA.com last updated net on March 17th. But it has Indiana's record from this year, which is strange.
Yeah, no, I've gotten fooled by that before.
Well,
Ken Palm, I think, is usually a good place to look, but it doesn't look like they gave a lot of
40th right now in Ken Palm.
Indiana a lot of love before the season.
Yeah, it was odd. The computer metrics, I don't know, maybe the concern of the lack of outside shooting was maybe an issue or whatever it was, or maybe Ken Palm does not like Mike Woodson as the head coach. And after the first half, I'm sure many Indiana fans felt the same. I was reading through the comments as I was on the call for Big Ten Plus on Sunday, and I was just seeing the number of people that I said, "Hey, I'm happy to have not have Big Ten Plus and not pay for it if I don't have to watch Mike Woodson get outcoached in the first 20 minutes." But they figured things out. Moving on, Indiana plays South Carolina on Saturday. Third game of the year is a definitely a pretty notable one. Talking about these bye games that have gotten closer and closer. Well, South Carolina fell the epitome of brutality, lost their first game 74-71 to North Florida at home. They've gathered two 20-plus point wins since then over South Carolina State and Towson. But this is obviously a team that was in the tournament last year. Almost, did they make it to the second weekend? I don't think so. Did they
No,
win? I think they at least won a game.
they might have gotten upset in the first round.
Interesting how I don't remember that. Now it's just I think of South Carolina, I just think of the women's team winning every single game that they play. But regardless, it's still a pretty big game. And Ian, you wrote some things down and some things to look out for because the South Carolina team also a lot of transfers and definitely a different look from last year.
Yeah, I do want to
Real quick,
start out. We
sorry, yeah, six seed of the first round, lost to the 11 seed Oregon. So
Uh,
yeah, they were first round upset.
Oregon almost lost the other night too against Portland. They had to have a crazy comeback and send that to overtime. So the Big Ten maybe struggled a little bit after starting off so well at home.
So, looking at South Carolina, I do want to start out first by talking about North Florida because they did lose that bye game, but North Florida is 3-1 on the year. They have two wins over Power Four teams, one of them being South Carolina, the other Georgia Tech, and they only lost to Georgia by 13 as well. So that's a good North Florida team. And then, like you said, Austin, South Carolina has won every other game pretty convincingly that they've played. 2-1 on the year, 88-64 over South Carolina State, 80-54 over Towson. Key player to look out for this game, Colin Murray Boyles, 21 points per game, 11 rebounds per game. They've got three 10-plus point per game scorers and five 8-plus point per game scorers in total. So they've got scoring from a little bit of everywhere. They rebound better than Indiana does, 42.3 points rebounds per game, I should say, to Indiana's 40.5. But the big thing here, Ben, you were talking about defending the three-pointer. South Carolina shoots 29.7% from three, and they've taken 64 attempts on the year compared to Indiana's 34. So they play kind of a modern style of basketball. A lot of three-pointers, a lot of scoring from across the board. Not always the most disciplined team. They do rebound well, but they're more offensively focused.
Yeah, I mean they lost Michi Johnson. It's huge. He went back to Ohio State. Murray Boyles is good though. I don't think this is the game that Indiana thought it would be when they put this on the schedule, though. I don't see a ton of the South Carolina team really. Like you said, they don't shoot the ball from 3-point range real well. They don't really particularly play great inside either. Um, I, the biggest thing, once again, is just making sure they don't get hot. Despite not shooting well from three, they're going to take a lot of threes. Still got to guard them, and then just pound them down low.
This is a team last year in South Carolina, which shared the ball really well, averaged 15 assists, just 10 turnovers. So that ratio at 1.5 reminds me a little bit of Minnesota last year with Elijah Hawkins, who was one of the best distributors in the country, averaged right around 8 assists last year. And it feels like South Carolina could be the same way. And I'm not just saying that because I love the color maroon, but considering both those teams have that. But this is a team that is going to pass the ball, I think, a lot. Shoot the ball, at a decent rate from beyond the arc. Last year they were at 34%, and they were rebounding was basically 50-50. They brought down 44 and gave up 43. And Indiana last year was negative in the rebounding margin, which is kind of crazy with a 7-footer and where went to the NBA draft and Renew and obviously all the other bigs that Indiana had off the bench. Obviously, the you mentioned that the center depth is something this year, which is a little bit more of a concern, depending on where kind of how Langdon Hatton progresses and goes through. Even though he did get a bucket on Sunday, but yeah, you hit the nail right on the head, Ben. This is not the South Carolina team you thought you were going to play when this game was announced in like May or June. I think this was an early one that Indiana you had to pick out somebody. You had to play a good non-conference game somewhere other than the Bahamas, and interesting. This is just a one game, a one-off. There's no trip next year to Columbia. It'll be interesting to see. But you got to win this game, I think, by double digits. The crowd on Sunday was terrible, especially the students, considering that the football game went longer for a 3:30 start, and a noon Sunday game is not going to make many people want to get up and get out of bed and let's go watch us beat up on Eastern Illinois. There just isn't that. This is obviously a little bit different at 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon when during football's bye week makes things a little interesting, and maybe people just don't want to pay for Peacock. It could be another reason, but it feels like got to win this game again by double digits, and this is obviously going to be a big stepping stone to see really how good this team is, because you mentioned the bye games, you really can't tell how good a team is, but a game like this, you can get a little bit of a better sense.
I think obviously this isn't the game that it was made out to be, but it's still an important game because if Indiana plays like they did in the first half of both of the first two games, it's not going to be pretty because South Carolina will take advantage of that. They're not going to have the luxury of being able to go in the locker room and then come out and dominate the second half as much as they did. While it's still possible, but I think Indiana needs to play a complete game to cement themselves as a an officially good team that can beat Power Four opponents consistently. A complete game in the first half and the second half, all phases of the game, rebounding, defense, scoring. It may not be perfect, but I'm with you, Austin. Double digit win, that'll be good enough for me.
Yeah, I don't think they need a double digit win per se. I think it would be nice, but again, it's early. This really kind of feels like a tune-up for the Maui. They probably will not play anyone, depending what happens in that first game against Louisville. I like Louisville this year more than I like South Carolina, to be completely honest. South Carolina team, you talked about them last year, Austin. They're just such a different team personnel wise, so it's kind of hard to gauge. But we haven't been able to tell a lot positively for South Carolina for the first few games, so it would be nice to win that game by double digits.
Yeah, that's we don't know a ton about them quite yet. Obviously, the SEC is still pretty obviously top heavy with Alabama running that show. And hey, South Carolina this year in football, they're not bad either. They're usually getting blown out to Clemson every year, but it feels like that game is actually going to be interesting. So maybe the students still focused on football over in Cocky as well. Any final thoughts before we depart on and get ready for the weekend and hopefully another IU dub to start 3-0?
Just don't overreact to the first two games and the eventual third here on Saturday. I mean, there's a long way to go. It's a long season. This team is figuring things out early. I feel like I've said this at the end of every episode as we've started the year. But I'm excited to see how they do against a Power Four team. It'll be a different look, higher stakes, and hopefully a good atmosphere inside Assembly Hall. Unfortunately, I will not be able to go because I'm going up to Purdue to watch the Purdue Penn State football game because I got $10 tickets on the bye week, so why not?
Corn brother.
So I will be watching that periodically throughout the day, but no, excited to see what happens. Yeah.
Ian, I love it. I gave the same speech on my Xavier podcast earlier today. They have a big one coming up on Saturday, home against Wake Forest, and I said the biggest thing: just do not overreact. Game three for Indiana out of 31. There will be plenty of opportunities to boost the resume. So that's the biggest thing for me. But yeah, thanks for having me on. Feels great. I was going to ask you guys, you want me to edit this podcast too, like last year? Or I think I'm happy to be on the podcast without editing it finally.
Yeah, there were enough times last year where I had to come in and save the day, or you were up in all hours in the morning trying to.
That's all. That's a lie.
Yeah,
All
well, okay. And then I did put the finishing touches on, but happy to have you back. We figured if there's, you have to at least ask you to be the first guest, and
yeah.
guest is probably like is offensive to you because you're always welcome back.
Well, I think I forgot to mention too, not so before on the beginning of the podcast, not so that people think I'm just some random who doesn't know anything about Indiana anymore. I do still cover Indiana for the Hoosier Network for one of our student outlets, so I'm not totally out of the loop on Indiana. So I feel qualified in a couple ways to be the first guest.
That's good. When baseball season hit last year and you're doing that, it felt like, oh boy, these episodes were a drag
Yeah,
considering your attention span and the amount of time you watched Indiana was yeah, just whoosh, straight
yeah.
down.
Only so many hours of the day.
Well, there's only so many hours left before Indiana plays South Carolina, 3 o'clock on Peacock. So students listening, you can get like $2 a month for Peacock. I have signed up for that, so you can definitely do that. Obviously, there'll be some women's and some other men's games on Peacock throughout the year. I think there is maybe a 7-day free trial for those of you that want to think about it. Who knows? Regardless, have a good weekend, everyone. Ben, thanks for hopping on, and
Thank you guys.
yeah, hoping for another IU dub. We'll talk to you next week as we get another week closer to the Atlanta strip, and yeah, hopefully Indiana will be undefeated until then. But for Ian and myself, for our first guest and former co-host Ben Haller, check him out over at Musketeer Madness. I'm Austin Platt, signing off here on the House of Hoosier.